Keanu Reeves walked into a charity gala to support sick children, only to realize he was the punchline of a cruel setup. Laughter echoed, cameras rolled, and the world watched. But what he did next left the room speechless and changed lives far beyond Hollywood. Why did Kim Kardashian regret inviting him that night? Before we continue this incredible story, let us know where you're watching from. If you enjoy stories like this, subscribe to the channel, because tomorrow we have another inspiring story you won't want to miss. The invitation arrived on thick ivory cardstock with elegant gold lettering that shimmered under the light. It was unexpected. Tucked between mail from his agent and a thank you note from a former co-star, the envelope bore a handwritten return address that simply said, K. Kardashian, Beverly Hills. Keanu Reeves turned it over in his hands, puzzled. He wasn't in the habit of attending glitzy social galas, but this one wasn't just a party. The invitation detailed a private fundraiser for several children's hospitals across the country, hosted in Kim Kardashian's estate, with proceeds benefiting pediatric oncology programs. He raised an eyebrow. It wasn't the kind of cause you ignored. His assistant, Monica, tapped the corner of the invitation. They're saying it's strictly philanthropic, no press, no cameras, very low-key. That made him hesitate more than it reassured him. Still, children's hospitals had long held a place in his heart. He had spent quiet hours at several over the years, often under aliases, playing guitar for terminal patients or donating anonymously through his foundation. If this event was truly for the kids, he could bear one awkward night. So he agreed. The evening of the fundraiser arrived, with a misty dusk hanging over Los Angeles. Keanu, dressed as he always did, dark jeans, a simple blazer, boots still worn from the week's errands. No entourage, no stylists, no car service. He drove himself, arriving in a black Toyota truck that pulled up awkwardly between a fleet of gleaming Bentleys and Lamborghinis. Security gave him a second glance but waved him through. As he stepped through the gated entrance, he felt it immediately. Something off. The air was thick with perfume and ambition. Palm fronds sparkled with string lights and classical music played from hidden speakers. Inside, crystal chandeliers hung over a marble floor teeming with celebrities, influencers, producers, and tech moguls. Everyone looked like they were auditioning for something. The conversations were shallow and loud, peppered with name drops and exaggerated laughter. Photographers mingled as if they were guests. Keanu nodded politely to a few people he recognized, but kept to himself. He sipped water, declined champagne, and tried to find someone involved in the actual charity. That's when he saw Kim Kardashian across the room. She stood near a cluster of high, profitable guests, dressed in an elegant silver gown, surrounded by cameras, even though the invitation had promised privacy. Her gaze flicked toward Keanu. She leaned in and whispered something to a nearby producer, then stifled a laugh. One of the influencers beside her looked over at Keanu and giggled, covering her mouth with a manicured hand. He felt it unease creeping in like a shadow. He wasn't unfamiliar with being watched, but this was different. These weren't fans, and this wasn't admiration. It felt like he was being sized up, like a prop in someone else's performance. The kind of performance that didn't need his consent. Still, he stayed. If there were children depending on this night, he could at least ensure their cause was honored. He moved toward the silent auction tables, which had items like luxury handbags, artwork, and vacation packages. But nowhere did he see any representatives from the hospitals. No doctors, no families, no video presentations, no emotional testimony. It was all optics. He passed a display where someone had casually placed a fake hospital bed with balloons as decor. That's when his stomach sank. This wasn't about healing. This was branding. And somewhere in the corner of the room, a camera clicked. Keanu turned toward the sound. One of the photographers quickly looked away, pretending to adjust his lens. but the lens had clearly been aimed at Keanu. The shot had been taken. He scanned the room more deliberately now. There were more cameras than he initially thought. They weren't official press, but personal smartphones, mini-rigs disguised as accessories, and handheld gimbals used by influencers pretending to document the night. A man in a velvet jacket walked by, murmuring into a wireless mic clipped to his collar. Keanu caught a phrase, "He's actually here. Let's see how he reacts." It clicked. This wasn't just a fundraiser. It was a setup. Somehow, his presence had become part of a hidden agenda. Maybe it was a reality TV segment, maybe a viral stunt, or maybe just cruel entertainment for bored celebrities. But someone had decided to make Keanu the unwitting star of tonight's unscripted show. He felt heat rise behind his ears, not anger, not yet, but a swell of disappointment. He had come for children, for healing, for dignity. Instead, he had walked into a theater of ego and manipulation. He stood still for a moment, watching. Kim Kardashian was now flanked by two producers from a streaming platform he recognized. One of them nodded toward a low-lit corner where a mobile backdrop had been set up, a fake hospital set complete with stethoscopes and donation jars. Keanu had seen this trick before in commercials where causes were props, not callings. Then she moved toward him. Kim, with a dazzling smile and flawless poise, reached out to take his hand. "Keanu, I'm so glad you came," she said, her voice floating above the noise. He shook her hand politely but didn't return the smile. She gestured to the hospital theme display. "We were hoping maybe you'd say a few words. Maybe tell that story about the little girl in Toronto, the one you visited in the hospital. We think it would inspire people to donate." Keanu blinked. That story was private. He had never shared it publicly. It was something sacred between him and a child who had passed away years ago, a moment that still brought tears to his eyes if he allowed himself to think too long. He didn't ask how she knew. He just took a breath and said quietly, "This isn't the place." Kim's smile faltered for a split second, but then she leaned in and whispered, "It could help the campaign. You wouldn't have to say your name, just your heart." He stepped back slightly, eyes searching hers for even a flicker of sincerity. What he saw instead was strategy. That was the moment he realized he had a decision to make. He could walk out, leave behind the cameras, the whispering, the betrayal of good intentions. Or he could stay and find a way to turn this charade into something real, something that didn't serve image or ego, but served truth. He looked past Kim and saw a teenager in the corner, maybe 17, holding a volunteer badge and looking out of place. She wasn't dressed for cameras. She wasn't networking. She was folding programs and quietly putting them on the chairs. Keanu walked past Kim without another word and headed toward the girl. The girl looked up as Keanu approached, startled but smiling politely. "Hi," he said gently. "I'm Keanu." Her eyes widened, but she didn't squeal or ask for a selfie. She nodded and said, "I know. I'm just helping out tonight. My brother was treated at the children's hospital last year." Keanu knelt beside the stack of programs she was sorting. "Is he doing okay now?" She nodded. "He's in remission. That hospital saved his life. I just wanted to do something small to give back." Keanu felt a lump rise in his throat. This girl, this teenager folding papers in the corner, was the real reason he'd shown up. She wasn't here for clout or clicks. She was here because of gratitude, because of hope. "Can I help?" Keanu asked. She hesitated, surprised. "You want to help me fold?" "Well, not," he said with a soft smile. "You're doing something that matters." As he sat beside her and began folding programs, the cameras kept rolling. Some influencers whispered in confusion, others laughed. Kim stood frozen near her set, unsure whether to follow or pose. But Keanu didn't look up. He just kept folding paper. In that small act, in that quiet defiance, He had already chosen his path. He wasn't going to walk away, not yet. He was going to turn this setup into something meaningful and do it on his own terms. The moment came unexpectedly. After about an hour of mingling, drinks, and glitzy small talk, a soft chime echoed through the venue. Lights dimmed and the stage lights flicked on. Kim Kardashian took the microphone with a bright smile, her presence commanding attention. Guests turned, clinking glasses and adjusting their phones, anticipating something Instagram-worthy. Kim's voice rang out with exaggerated enthusiasm. "We have a very, very special guest tonight. Someone whose silence speaks louder than most of us ever could." A ripple of polite laughter followed. "Keanu, would you join me on stage?" Keanu hesitated. He had been standing near a large sculpture installation, quietly sipping water. His instinct told him something was off, but the room's collective gaze was already on him, and a spotlight followed his every step as he made his way to the front. He climbed the stage stairs slowly, not out of hesitation, but caution. The vibe had shifted. The energy in the room didn't feel celebratory. It felt curated, performative. Kim turned to him and offered a playful smile. "We thought we'd put together a little tribute, just for fun," she said sweetly, then stepped aside. The screen behind them lit up. At first it showed a few nostalgic clips from his movies, iconic scenes from The Matrix, John Wick, and Speed. The audience clapped and laughed. Keanu gave a small nod, arms folded, keeping a composed demeanor. But the tribute took a sharp turn. Suddenly, the screen shifted to a series of red carpet clips where Keanu was notably reserved, paparazzi yelling his name while he gave modest waves or no response. The footage was intercut with viral memes, exaggerated impersonations of his speech cadence, and mock titles like "Hollywood's Favorite Hermit" and "The Man Who Forgot How to Talk." Some of the edits were cruelly sharp. One influencer's TikTok played on repeat, mimicking Keanu's quiet nature, while others in the background laughed uncontrollably. Another cut showed celebrity hosts sarcastically praising him for always being there, doing nothing. Then came the final slide. A flashy neon graphic flashed across the screen in Comic Sans font. "The mute monk of Hollywood?" The crowd gasped, followed by scattered laughter, mostly from the influencer tables. Some looked uncomfortable. Others began recording reactions. Phones went up in waves. Whispers spread across the room like wildfire. Keanu stood still, center stage, staring at the screen. His jaw tightened, but he didn't flinch. He didn't turn toward Kim, who now stood with an awkward smirk, clearly trying to play it off as lighthearted. He didn't glare at the crowd. He didn't storm off. Instead, he closed his eyes for a brief moment, just long enough to collect himself. When he opened them again, the room had gone quiet, eerily so. The laughter faded into uncertainty. People weren't sure whether this was still part of the act or if they had just crossed a line. Then Keanu reached for the microphone. Everyone watched, phones up, streaming live, ready for drama. But instead of outrage, what came next would change everything. Keanu took the microphone in both hands, holding it gently. For a moment, he didn't speak. The silence stretched, pressing against the tension in the room. He looked out at the audience, not in anger, but in quiet observation. Some lowered their phones. Others looked down, suddenly self-conscious. He finally spoke, his voice soft, clear, and unwavering. "I've been called a lot of things in this industry, some kind, some cruel. But what I've always believed is that silence, real silence, isn't empty." The room stilled. Even the servers froze. "It's not a flaw," he continued. "It's space. It's listening. It's leaving room for someone else to breathe." Kim shifted uncomfortably off to the side. Her smile was now strained. She hadn't expected this. She expected him to walk away, maybe get flustered, maybe call her out. But not this, whatever this was becoming. Keanu looked directly at one of the tables filled with influencers, where a young woman sat, clutching her phone like a shield. Her earlier laughter had vanished. Her expression was unreadable now. I've been quiet in rooms full of noise. I've watched people confuse volume with strength. But what's louder than words is action. A slow murmur moved through the audience. I came here tonight because I believed this was about children, about helping them, about making sure kids in hospital beds didn't feel alone, not for press, not for a meme, not for laughs at someone's expense. He paused again, his voice catching just slightly. I'm not offended. I'm not embarrassed. I've lived through worse than this. Now, no one was recording. Phones were dropping into laps. I've buried people I loved. I've held hands with strangers in hospital rooms. I've sat in shelters and watched children cry themselves to sleep. And you know what I learned from all of it? He glanced at the screen still frozen behind him, showing that mocking phrase. When you have a platform, even if you're quiet, you can use it to lift someone else. A man in the back cleared his throat loudly, trying to break the weight of the moment. But it didn't work. Keanu kept going. So, if tonight was meant to humiliate me, I want to thank you, because it reminded me why I speak less and do more. His voice remained steady, but his eyes betrayed emotion. A flicker of old pain met with present strength. Kindness, he said, shouldn't require a microphone, but sometimes you have to use one anyway. He gently handed the mic back to the host near the stage. The young woman didn't reach for it. She just stared at him, stunned. And then something remarkable happened. A few guests began to clap, not the forced, polite kind, but slow, unsure applause. It was raw, human, awkward in the best way, because it meant it was real. Kim stood off to the side, frozen between offense and confusion. This wasn't going the way she'd planned. Keanu gave one last glance at the crowd and walked down from the stage, head held high. As Keanu stepped off the stage, the applause grew, not thunderous, but steady and reverent. A few people rose to their feet, not because it was expected, but because they had been moved. Influencers who had come for content now looked at him differently. A few whispered quietly among themselves, no longer laughing. Kim remained rooted in place, her planned photo op ruined, her smug confidence shaken. She tried to regain control, stepping toward the mic with a strained smile. "Well, that was deep," she said, attempting to pivot the moment back into entertainment. But her voice sounded hollow, and no one responded. It hung in the air like a balloon, slowly losing air. Keanu didn't look back. He didn't need to. His point had been made, not with anger, not with drama, but with something stronger. Grace. Back at his table, Monica, a former nurse turned advocate who had come with Keanu, quietly wiped her eyes. "That," she whispered, "is what real power looks like." The rest of the night unraveled awkwardly. The DJ played upbeat music, but no one danced. The cameras remained lowered, and Kim Kardashian, for once, wasn't the center of attention, because something extraordinary had just happened. In a room built for show, one quiet man reminded everyone what it meant to be real. Keanu stood still behind the podium. Not a word. Just the soft hum of the microphone picking up his breathing. The crowd, buzzing seconds ago, fell into a strange quiet. Forks froze mid-air. Conversations dissolved. Every camera focused in. But he didn't flinch. He scanned the room, not with judgment, but with a kind of quiet reflection, like he was waiting for the right moment to speak. The seconds dragged, and the silence grew heavier. At first, people exchanged glances, wondering if this was part of some act. But slowly, that uncertainty shifted into attention. Then he spoke. "I used to hate silence," he began softly. "It reminded me of hospitals, of waiting rooms, of nights when I didn't know if my sister would make it through the morning. The room changed in an instant. Kim, who had taken a step forward earlier, now froze where she stood. A few people slowly lowered their phones. "I was 19 when Kim got sick. Leukemia," he said, his voice even but thick with memory. "Back then, I thought silence meant helplessness. That if I wasn't talking or doing something, I was failing her." A beat of pause. "But what I learned," he continued, "is that silence isn't emptiness. Sometimes it's where you meet people in their pain without needing to fix it. Sometimes it's the only thing loud enough to carry love." A few people shifted in their seats. "I've been called quiet, awkward, the mute monk, apparently," he said with a gentle smile. A few chuckles slipped out, hesitant but no longer mocking. "But when you sit next to someone who's scared they're going to die," Keanu added, "you learn that kindness doesn't need an audience. It doesn't shout, it doesn't post, it just shows up." He paused again, letting the weight of that truth sink in. "When my sister lost her hair," she said, "she didn't want anyone to look at her. She didn't want sympathy. She just wanted one person to sit with her. So I did. Every night. Even if I had a role to prepare for the next day, even if I was scared. I sat in that silence with her, and I started to understand it. I started to respect it." His voice remained calm, but his eyes were glassy now. "I don't mind if people laugh at me, that's okay," he said quietly. "I've had worse things happen. But tonight, this was supposed to be for children, for hope, for love." He looked out into the room again, this time locking eyes with a young woman in a bright red dress who had just been laughing minutes ago. She couldn't meet his gaze now. "I came here thinking we were going to raise money for kids in hospitals who don't care how famous anyone is. They care that someone shows up for them, someone who reminds them they matter." Another pause, this one deeper. "That's why I came. Not for the cameras, not for the compliments, just to show up." He stepped back slightly, hands resting lightly on the podium, and let the room digest what he had just offered. No outrage, no rebuke, just truth wrapped in humility. The room was still quiet, but something in it had shifted. Keanu's words had created an invisible current, one that rippled across tables and touched the edges of people's hearts, whether they wanted it to or not. He hadn't raised his voice, he hadn't pointed fingers, but the impact was undeniable. A woman in the corner, previously live-streaming the event with light-hearted commentary, lowered her phone without prompting. One of the influencers near the front, who had shared memes of Keanu earlier in the week, suddenly looked far less sure of her posture. Her arms slowly crossed, not in defiance but in discomfort, almost like she was shielding herself from what she had just participated in. Keanu looked around again, then gently continued, "You know, I was once filming overseas when a little boy ran up to me outside the set. No shoes. Couldn't have been more than 8 years old. He had this tattered notebook full of stick figure drawings. He didn't speak English, but he handed it to me with both hands. And you know what I saw?" He smiled faintly at the memory. "I saw that every single page had someone helping someone else, carrying someone, feeding someone, hugging someone. And at the bottom of every page, he had written the same word over and over. Light." He paused. I asked the translator what that meant, and she told me the boy said, "Because light is what I want to be." There was an audible exhale from someone in the audience. That boy didn't have a house. He didn't have a voice in this industry. But he had purpose. He had love. He had light. And he shared it without needing anything back. Keanu let his gaze land softly on Kim. She had gone still, arms tucked tightly in front of her as if unsure how to respond. The smirk that had played on her lips earlier was long gone. "I know humor is part of this world," Keanu said, his tone never harsh. "I've laughed at myself plenty of times. But we've forgotten how powerful sincerity can be, how rare it is, how fragile." He took a breath. "I came here thinking this was about giving, about helping children who don't have anyone, children who are alone, in pain, fighting things they don't deserve, children who would give anything just to be seen. He looked down for a moment, then back up. Instead, I saw people using kindness as a backdrop for attention, turning silence into spectacle. There was no anger in his voice, no judgment, just a calm sadness, deep and piercing. But even in this room, I still believe in what brought me here. I still believe in the reason I said yes to the invitation. He turned to the event organizers sitting near the sound booth. I'll still donate, and I'll match whatever's raised tonight, not because of the way I was treated, but because somewhere right now, a child is lying in a hospital bed, wondering if anyone sees them. And then, that landed hard. No one clapped. No one dared. It would have felt wrong, performative. Instead, heads lowered, napkins quietly rose to eyes. Keanu didn't shame the room. He didn't ask them to feel guilty. He simply reminded them what it meant to be human. Keanu stood there, still, hands gently resting on the podium. For a moment, it wasn't a celebrity fundraiser. It wasn't a spectacle. It was something deeper, stripped of pretense. He looked out at the audience, not as stars or followers or influencers, but as people. People who had forgotten, perhaps just for a moment, why they had come. He took one final breath, soft but steady. "You don't need to be loud to be powerful," he said. "You don't need to be seen to matter." Then he stepped back. No applause followed, just silence. Thick, reverent, unspoken. And then one person stood. Not a celebrity, not a producer. A nurse, standing quietly near the back, invited as a guest by one of the hospital foundations. She placed her hand over her heart. Slowly, others followed. No one cheered. They just stood, heads bowed, humbled. Kim didn't move. Her eyes were glassy now. She turned away for a second, brushing her cheek as if swatting away dust. But everyone knew it wasn't dust. Even she hadn't expected this. Whatever stunt had been planned, whatever ratings boost or viral moment she had aimed for, it had unraveled completely, and something real had taken its place. After a pause, Keanu stepped off the stage and returned to his seat. He didn't wave, he didn't acknowledge the standing room. He simply sat back down, folded his hands, and lowered his gaze. An older actor next to him leaned over. "That was the most human thing I've ever seen in this town," he whispered. Keanu nodded faintly, but said nothing. His eyes were focused on something else now, something beyond the event, beyond the room. The evening carried on, but its tone had shifted dramatically. The DJ never returned. The hosts dropped the planned skits. Instead, people began to walk up quietly to the donation table, placing envelopes down without fanfare. One woman gave up her diamond bracelet on the spot and asked it to be auctioned anonymously for the hospital. In the far corner, a famous social media influencer known for her outrageous stunts turned her phone off mid-recording and whispered to her assistant, "Don't post anything from tonight. Just don't." As the final guests trickled out, something strange happened. A few of them formed a line near Keanu, not for selfies or social clout, but to quietly say thank you. Not everyone, but enough to matter. And when the night ended, there was no press conference, no flashy exit. Keanu slipped away through the kitchen entrance, just like he had arrived. Quiet, unnoticed, intentional. But the impact? That would echo far louder than any viral clip ever could. As soon as Keanu exited the stage and the last of the guests filtered out into the night, something shifted inside the Beverly Hills mansion. Gone was the buzz of influencers comparing follower counts. Gone was the glitzed-up laughter and rehearsed charm. What lingered instead was tension. Thin, sharp, and undeniable. Kim Kardashian stood in a corner near the bar, arms folded, her usual composure faltering. Her assistant whispered urgently in her ear, waving a phone, but Kim brushed it away and pulled out her own. A flood of texts were already pouring in, some from publicists, others from guests who had slipped away early and now regretted not staying. But a few messages hit harder. Screenshots. A well-known YouTube influencer had leaked a conversation. The message thread included Kim, the influencer, and a media producer, and it wasn't ambiguous. Kim's text was clear. "Let's lighten it up. Do something that'll go viral." Keanu's quiet. "Let's make that the punchline. He'll take it well. He's a good sport." Another message added, "Let's call it the mute monk of Hollywood. Playful, but will trend fast." The influencer responded with laughing emojis and a meme suggestion. The idea was to blend tribute with gentle mockery. Ride the line between flattery and insult. But now, the joke had cracked wide open. One of Kim's team members approached, pale-faced. "BuzzFeed just picked it up," she said. "They're quoting the texts. Reddit's exploding. Twitter's even worse." Kim took a breath, sharp and thin. "Get ahead of it," she snapped. "Issue a statement. Say it was meant as a playful roasts. Everyone does roasts." Another assistant hesitated. "But Keanu didn't laugh?" Kim glared. "Doesn't matter, he didn't storm off, did he?" But her voice lacked its usual force. Even she could feel it. This wasn't going to disappear with a tweet. Meanwhile, across town, Keanu Reeves stepped into a quiet hallway of a children's hospital in West Los Angeles. The halls were dim, the nurses hushed, the clock pushing toward midnight. He wasn't there for attention. He hadn't told anyone. No photographers, no entourage. Just a small bouquet of balloon animals he had picked up on the way, and a soft bag of books, some donated, some personal favorites. He didn't talk much. He didn't need to. He moved room to room, sitting beside sleeping children, reading softly to a few who were awake, helping adjust a pillow, offering a listening ear to a tired mother who hadn't left her son's bedside in days. A nurse, recognizing him but unsure what to say, finally asked quietly, "What brings you here tonight?" Keanu looked at her, calm and gentle. "Seemed like a better way to end the night," he said. Back at the mansion, damage control was in full swing. Kim's PR team drafted a carefully worded post on her official account, calling the moment a misunderstood tribute segment meant to celebrate Keanu's legendary calm and humility. She added a selfie with him from earlier that night, captioned with, "Always love and respect for the legend himself." But no one was buying it. The leaked texts had already spread to major news outlets. Headlines exploded. Keanu Reeves set up for humiliation at celebrity fundraiser. Kardashian's viral stunt backfires. And the actor who stayed silent and won the internet. Clips of Keanu's composed response were everywhere. One guest had recorded his short speech and uploaded it. Within hours, the video amassed millions of views. The caption read, "This is how a real man responds to disrespect, with grace." Social media erupted. Hashtags like "Respect Keanu," "Mute Monk No More," and "Silence Speaks" started trending worldwide. People weren't just defending him, they were moved by him. A woman tweeted, "My son has autism and struggles to speak. Seeing Keanu stand up there, not getting angry but still speaking his truth, I cried." Another comment read, "They didn't tear anyone down. He just reminded us what real dignity looks like." Meanwhile, influencers who had laughed at the tribute were already walking back their reactions, posting apologies and clarifying that they had no idea it would go that far. Some deleted footage. Others went quiet. But Keanu didn't say a word. He didn't post a thing. At the hospital, he continued his quiet rounds. He sat with a teenager recovering from surgery, listening to music through shared earbuds. He gave a high five to a young boy who had drawn superheroes with IVs in their arms. He knelt beside a little girl, too weak to speak, holding her hand for nearly an hour while her father slept sitting upright in the corner. The hospital staff stood at a respectful distance. No one snapped photos. No one asked for autographs. They understood this was something sacred. When Keanu finally left around 3 a.m., he thanked the night nurses for their care and asked if there was a donation link for the ward. He didn't leave his name on the donation form, just wrote, "With gratitude for all you do." By morning, a quiet photo began circulating, not from the fundraiser, but from the hospital. A nurse had posted a picture of a child's crayon drawing taped to the wall. It showed a man with long hair standing beside stick-figure children, all smiling. The caption simply read, "He was here last night, no cameras, just kindness." That image hit harder than any viral meme. News anchors who had covered the event's glitz now shifted their tone. Morning shows replayed Keanu's speech and contrasted it with the leaked text messages. Public sympathy swelled. Even longtime critics admitted there was something profoundly human in his response. Not just restraint, but presence. Not just silence, but impact. Kim remained silent for the next 24 hours. But her brand was already taking hits. Sponsors questioned the optics. Journalists requested interviews, digging deeper into past PR stunts and faux philanthropy events. The internet had turned. And this time, they weren't interested in who wore what. They were interested in who actually showed up when it mattered. And Keanu? He had already returned home, avoiding the noise entirely. He watered his garden, fed his dog, and replied to a letter from a sick child he'd met that night. He didn't need to control the narrative. He had already changed it. The internet didn't just react, it ignited. Within hours of Keanu's quiet speech and the viral hospital drawing, Twitter, Instagram, and TikTok exploded. A video clip of him standing calmly on stage, looking straight ahead, with eyes filled with quiet resolve, racked up over 10 million views in a single night. One user captioned it, "This is what strength looks like." Another wrote, "He turned a setup into a sermon." The hashtags began multiplying. First came Keanu Grace, then Kindness is Power. By the following day, they were trending globally. Memes of Keanu with angel wings popped up next to screenshots of the mocking video Kim's team had arranged. Except now, the tone had shifted. What had been meant to ridicule him was being reclaimed as a tribute to resilience. One influencer who had giggled at the fundraiser posted a shaky apology video the next morning. She was visibly upset, makeup smudged, whispering that she didn't realize how deeply it would hurt him. "We all laughed," she admitted. "And he didn't humiliate us, he reminded us who we were supposed to be." The internet wasn't buying all the apologies, but they were hungry for the truth. That's when the stories started rolling in. A makeup artist who had once worked with Keanu on a low-budget indie film posted a thread. "He saw me crying in the bathroom one day," she wrote. "Didn't ask questions, just sat outside until I came out. Said nothing, just gave me a note that read, 'You are not invisible, keep creating.' That note is still in my wallet." Another post came from a former security guard. He shared a grainy photo of himself standing next to Keanu years ago, followed by a second photo of his son in a hospital bed. "Keanu paid for my son's heart surgery," he wrote. "Quietly, no press, he found out through someone on set. I didn't even know until the bill disappeared." Those stories didn't go viral for their flash. They went viral because they felt real. They revealed something deeper. This wasn't a one-time display of grace. This was a pattern, a life lived quietly for others, long before a stage, a spotlight, or a scandal ever appeared. More testimonials flooded every platform. A school janitor from Vancouver, where Keanu had once filmed for several weeks, shared a brief video. In it, he recalled finding Keanu early one morning, mopping the cafeteria floor. "I thought he was lost," the man laughed. "But he just said, 'You looked tired yesterday. Figured I'd help.' And he did. Every morning that week." Another came from a young woman who had once been homeless. She wrote that she'd met Keanu near a coffee shop where she used to sleep behind the dumpster. "He gave me a fresh bagel, asked my name, and just listened." 2 days later, someone anonymously paid for 6 months of transitional housing. "I know it was him. He never said." But I know. Mainstream media caught up quickly. Talk shows dissected every moment from the fundraiser. One panelist on a national morning show said, "You know, people talk about class, but that was grace under fire. That was strength without shouting." Meanwhile, entertainment outlets tried to repair the damage to Kim Kardashian's image, spinning the event as a satirical miscommunication. But the leaked texts told another story. Screenshots showed Kim exchanging messages with a YouTube prank influencer the night before the fundraiser. "Let's get the monk talking," one message read. Another, "Quiet Keanu needs a viral moment. This is his." Those messages, once confirmed, turned the tide definitively. Public opinion wasn't just against the stunt. It was rising in defense of something much deeper. People felt it, that what they had witnessed wasn't just celebrity drama. It was a mirror. They saw a man who had every reason to walk away, every right to respond in anger. But instead, he had shown restraint, vulnerability, and a level of emotional intelligence that felt almost alien in today's culture of clapbacks and instant outrage. Young people, especially, started sharing their reflections. "This man has been through more than most of us know," one viral post read. "And instead of fighting noise with noise, he reminded us of something sacred, kindness in silence." Even teenagers began creating tribute videos, montages of Keanu's quiet moments, his old interviews, his visits to cancer wards, or moments caught off camera when he thought no one was watching. The videos weren't flashy. They didn't need to be. They spoke a language of gentleness, a language people were starving for. The ripple effects reached even further than anyone anticipated. Mainstream media picked up the story, but it wasn't the typical headline frenzy. It was different. This time, the tone was reverent. "Keanu turns humiliation into grace," one article read. "Hollywood's loudest room silenced by quiet strength," said another. Op-eds praised his dignity, while late-night hosts, initially unsure how to cover it, pivoted midweek, choosing to applaud instead of mock. A well-known influencer publicly apologized on a live stream watched by over 1 million viewers. He admitted he had once dismissed Keanu as boring, calling him that actor who never talks. With tears in his eyes, he stared directly into the camera and said, "Turns out, I was just too loud to hear what dignity sounds like. I was wrong, completely wrong." Keanu's words weren't what echoed, it was his silence. It was how he stood still as the world laughed and, instead of retreating, responded with grace and a gentle story. That silence became louder than any viral clip. It made people pause, reflect. Then came an avalanche of personal stories. A makeup artist posted a short video explaining how Keanu had once stayed with her after a panic attack during filming, sitting beside her for hours without saying a word, just letting her breathe. A former security guard from a Toronto studio shared how Keanu paid for his son's heart surgery in secret, never telling anyone. "I only found out because the hospital called and said the bill was settled anonymously. I recognized the handwriting on the card that came with the flowers." Social media platforms were flooded with "Keanu grace," "kindness is power," and "silent strength." It wasn't just fan pages or tabloids anymore. School teachers were sharing the video with students. Counselors used his speech in group therapy. Ministers quoted his words in Sunday sermons. The story stopped being about Kim's event and started becoming about something deeper. A movement rooted in humility. Even those who had stayed silent at the party began speaking up. A young actor posted a heartfelt thread on X, admitting he had laughed awkwardly during the tribute, unsure what was going on. "I didn't have the courage to say anything then, but I wish I had." Watching Keanu stand there, he reminded me of who I wanted to be when I first came to Hollywood. The most viral moment wasn't from the event itself. It was a candid shot taken the next morning. A nurse at a local children's hospital uploaded a photo of Keanu sitting on the floor beside a little boy in a wheelchair. The caption read, He didn't say anything about what happened last night. He just asked if he could help us pass out breakfast trays. That post alone garnered over 20 million likes. And the comments under that photo? Those told the real story. One user wrote, "He didn't need to say much. The whole room felt it. That's power." Another simply posted, "This changed how I want to live." Stories poured in from around the globe. In South Africa, a school held an assembly on grace. In Japan, a quiet tribute was added to a temple wall bearing Keanu's name under the words, "Kindness without witness." In Brazil, children held signs in Portuguese translating to, "Even when mocked, be kind, be Keanu." Keanu never responded publicly. He didn't need to. His response had already reshaped the entire narrative. While gossip columns speculated and influencers scrambled for damage control, Keanu was seen quietly exiting the back entrance of a hospital in downtown Los Angeles. No press, no entourage, just him, holding a drawing given to him by a little girl undergoing chemotherapy. The picture was simple, a stick figure with messy hair standing beneath a bright yellow sun. Underneath, she'd written in crayon, "Thank you for seeing me." And that was all that mattered. For Keanu, it was never about headlines. It was about hearts. And that night, despite being mocked on stage, he reminded the world that humility isn't weakness. It's the rarest kind of strength. It began slowly. The morning after the event, while most media outlets buzzed about Keanu Reeves's unexpected silence and the leaked texts exposing the fundraiser setup, a single voice broke through the noise. A young influencer named Sasha James, known for her flashy fashion videos and viral challenges, posted a short clip from her bedroom. Her makeup was smudged and her eyes were red. This wasn't content, it was raw confession. "I thought we were just being funny," she said quietly. "I didn't know what they were going to show on that screen, but when I saw Keanu standing there, not angry, just still, something cracked inside me. I've built my entire identity online, trying to get people to look at me. And he stood there, being everything I pretend to be." She paused to wipe her face with her sleeve, then added, "Mr. Reeves, if you ever see this, I'm sorry. I've been chasing validation. You reminded me that it's not about being seen. It's about seeing others." The video was viewed over 9 million times in its first 24 hours. Comment sections overflowed with people thanking her for speaking up. Other influencers began posting their own apologies, not all as tearful, but sincere in tone. A fitness coach with 2 million followers admitted that he had laughed during the tribute. "I thought it was harmless. I didn't realize it was cruelty in disguise. I want to do better." Behind the scenes, some reached out to Keanu's team privately. A producer who had helped edit the montage reportedly sent a long, handwritten letter of apology. One well-known prank YouTuber emailed Keanu personally, expressing regret and asking if he could meet to apologize in person, not for a video, just to make it right. Keanu, as always, didn't respond publicly, but one of his close friends told a journalist off record that Keanu had read every message. "He forgives easily," the friend said. But more than that, he believes people can change. He wants this to be more than a scandal. He hopes it becomes a mirror. Meanwhile, something surprising started to happen. Kindness, actual tangible kindness, began trending. Users began challenging each other to do something generous without posting about it. A new hashtag emerged, Silent Good. It was born from Keanu's refusal to defend himself and instead simply serve. People started donating anonymously to children's hospitals, cancer centers, food banks. One viral tweet read, "If Keanu can get mocked in front of millions and still go serve soup to sick kids that night, I can call my grandma today." At the very hospital Keanu had quietly visited, administrators reported an unusual surge in donations. A pediatric nurse there posted that an anonymous donor had just paid off the hospital's overdue electric bill. "I don't know who you are," she wrote, "but you're following in someone's quiet footsteps." What had started as a cruel setup to go viral had unintentionally birthed something pure. It wasn't loud, it wasn't monetized, it wasn't trendy in the typical way, but people felt it. Something deeper, something real. Keanu's silence had done what no influencer campaign ever could. It recentered the narrative around compassion. And now, a generation raised on retweets and views found itself pausing, reflecting. And in that space, redemption began to bloom. In the days that followed, the apologies continued, but they began to shift in tone. It was no longer just about saving face. Something genuine had taken hold. A well-known fashion vlogger released a video showing herself volunteering at a shelter for the first time. Not sponsored, not recorded professionally. Just her, sweeping floors and handing out warm meals. "I used to think I was too busy for this," she admitted, "but that night, that man made me feel small in the best way." Even mainstream media began picking up the trend. Morning shows played clips of Keanu's speech alongside montages of strangers doing acts of kindness. A segment on national television referred to it as the Keanu effect, showing clips of fans donating to children's hospitals, making anonymous care packages, and even standing in silent protest outside celebrity mansions, holding signs that read, "Do better, be like him." But perhaps the most surprising turn came from within the influencer world itself. A few content creators began stripping their pages of filters and curated images. One wrote, "I've been posting who I wanted you to think I was. Today, I'm showing you who I actually am." The post included a long caption about growing up in the foster system and how seeing Keanu stand in grace made her want to reconnect with the children's charity she once benefited from. It wasn't a viral challenge, it wasn't a campaign, it wasn't for likes. It was quieter, more honest, a ripple that reached where algorithms never could. Still, Kim Kardashian remained silent. Her PR team issued a statement calling the event a misunderstood tribute that didn't land as intended. But the damage was already done. Leaked text exchanges continued to surface, ones showing discussions about how to soft launch the roast to maximize online engagement. Many of her own fans began to turn on her. "Why mock someone who does good in silence?" one fan tweeted. "Keanu's never tried to go viral. That's why he matters." And yet, amid the whirlwind of trending hashtags and shifting opinions, Keanu stayed where he always did, in the background. He declined interview requests, turned down talk show invites, and asked that no official statement be made on his behalf. Instead, he was spotted again, at the same children's hospital. This time, not at night, but mid-morning, reading to a group of young patients in the common room. One of the nurses shared a photo of him sitting on the floor, legs crossed, book in hand, surrounded by kids with IVs and blankets. No captions, no hashtags, just the image. And that image traveled the world faster than any angry headline ever could. What made the moment so powerful wasn't just that Keanu refused to fight fire with fire. It was that he planted something else entirely, a different seed, one of gentleness, humility, and purpose. Because sometimes the most powerful voice in the room isn't the loudest. It's the one that doesn't need to shout at all. By the end of the week, the Children's Hospital released a quiet statement of its own. Donations had increased tenfold. Volunteers were pouring in. One child, in remission from leukemia, made a handmade card that simply read, "Thank you for not yelling. You made me feel seen." The world had expected Keanu to clap back, to deliver some mic drop response, but what they got was far more disruptive. A man who held his ground without striking a single blow. A man who, in the face of mockery, chose compassion. Even Sasha, the influencer who had initially mocked him in the leaked texts, posted again. This time she wasn't crying. She was holding a box of toys and books, ready to deliver to the same hospital. "He made me want to be more than relevant," she said. "He made me want to be useful." A podcast episode titled "When Silence Spoke Louder Than Fame" climbed to the top of the charts. People weren't just consuming content anymore, they were questioning it. And perhaps that was the most unexpected twist of all. Because in a world built to reward noise, Keanu Reeves reminded everyone what it means to whisper something unforgettable into the heart of a moment and let it echo. 1 week after the fundraiser, Keanu received a discreet message from someone in Kim Kardashian's camp. It wasn't an official statement, no flashy email header or brand signature, just a handwritten note delivered by a mutual acquaintance. It read, "Would you meet me for coffee? Just the two of us? No cameras. Kim." Keanu didn't reply right away. He sat with it. For days. The media frenzy hadn't stopped. News outlets were still dissecting the event, and hashtags were still trending. But Keanu had turned his attention elsewhere. He had spent the last several nights back at the children's hospital, delivering books, holding hands, listening to stories about unicorns and space. That's where his energy went. But the note stayed in his back pocket, literally. He folded it, carried it, and thought about it. When he finally responded, it wasn't through an assistant or publicist. He wrote a short reply on the same piece of paper. Friday, 9 a.m., Quiet Grounds Cafe, Los Feliz. Just talk. Friday morning came, gray and cool. The cafe was tucked beneath overgrown bougainvillea, a place with mismatched wooden chairs and a chalkboard menu. It was known for its silence more than its style. No music played, only the soft scrape of ceramic cups and the occasional whisper of foam being steamed. Keanu arrived early, as always. He wore a plain black jacket and jeans. No entourage. He ordered a black coffee and sat at a corner table shaded by a vine-covered trellis. Kim arrived late, about 15 minutes, but she came alone. She was dressed simply, still elegant, but without the camera-ready shine. Her hair pulled back, no makeup except maybe a little under her eyes. She looked tired, and maybe for the first time in years, she looked unsure. Keanu stood briefly when she arrived. She nodded, slid into the seat across from him, and for a moment said nothing. Then, with a quiet breath, she began. "I thought it would be funny. The video, the tribute. It was meant to be light. I thought you'd laugh, or maybe just roll your eyes." She picked at the edge of the napkin, her voice barely above a whisper. "I didn't expect what happened, any of it." Keanu listened without shifting, his face calm, still. "I wasn't trying to hurt you," she added, "but I can see now how that doesn't really matter." The silence between them was full, not awkward, not empty, just present. Keanu finally spoke. "You know," he said gently, "the world already has too many people trying to be seen." He looked up, his eyes steady but kind. "What if we started trying to see?" Kim blinked. The words landed like a stone dropped in still water. No judgment, no accusation, just a challenge. A truth. She didn't respond right away. Her throat moved as if she were swallowing something deeper than coffee. Regret, maybe. Or the unfamiliar weight of having someone see through her walls without shattering them. The conversation didn't stretch on for hours. It didn't need to. Keanu didn't offer a lecture, and Kim didn't deliver a tearful confession. But something shifted. A door cracked open inside her. Quiet, internal. When they stood to leave, Kim offered her hand. Keanu shook it without hesitation. No cameras, no headlines, just two people at a cafe, parting with more than they came with. That same afternoon, Kim drove herself out of Beverly Hills. No driver, no stylist, no assistant trailing behind with a phone and clipboard. She didn't tell anyone where she was going. Not her PR team, not her manager. She turned off her notifications, pulled on a pair of sunglasses, and followed the directions to the children's hospital Keanu had visited after the event. When she arrived, she didn't walk through the front lobby. She went around back, found the staff entrance, and quietly asked a nurse if she could volunteer for an hour. No press, no photos, just time. The nurse looked surprised but recognized her. She didn't ask questions. She handed Kim a pair of clean scrubs, pointed to the pediatric wing and said, "Room 214. A little boy named Ezra has been asking for company all week." Kim changed in the small restroom. She looked at herself in the mirror. Not her reflection, but what it meant. A woman used to being seen, now trying to disappear into something real. She walked down the hall, slowly, past hand-drawn murals of jungle animals, rocket ships, and rainbows. Past crayon thank you cards taped to the walls. When she opened the door to room 214, Ezra was sitting up in bed, surrounded by stuffed animals. He was 6. Pale, thin, with a big smile that didn't match the IV in his arm. He looked up, curious. "Are you a nurse?" he asked. Kim hesitated. "No, I'm just someone who wanted to say hi." Ezra grinned. "Cool." They played with action figures for a while. He told her about his dreams of becoming a pilot. She listened, asked questions, let him teach her how to fold a paper plane. She laughed when it nosedived into her lap. She stayed for almost 2 hours, longer than she meant to. At one point, a nurse peeked in and said, "Everything okay?" Kim nodded. "Perfect." Before she left, Ezra handed her a paper drawing. It was a stick figure of her next to him, both wearing capes. Above them, the words, "Real heroes don't wear suits." She stared at it for a moment, then blinked back something behind her lashes. She thanked him, hugged him gently, and slipped the picture into her bag. Outside, the sunlight felt different, not filtered through tinted windows or edited for a post. She sat in her car for a while, hands resting on the wheel, engine off. She didn't call anyone, she didn't post. There were no Instagram stories or cryptic tweets. But something inside her had begun to shift. Later that night, she called her assistant and asked to cancel her next 2 influencer brand shoots. When asked why, she simply said, "I need to rethink a few things." Meanwhile, word of Kim's quiet hospital visit began to trickle through the staff. No one leaked it to the press. The hospital had a strict confidentiality policy. But it reached the ears of a few nurses, then a patient's mom, then the cafeteria clerk. They all said the same thing. She made alone. She didn't take any photos. She didn't talk about herself once. In a world trained to capture everything for attention, her silence was louder than any headline. And Keanu? He didn't know yet. He was back on set, working quietly, as he always did. But somehow, without saying a word, he had started something. 2 days later, a handwritten letter arrived at Keanu's mailbox. No return address, just soft cream stationery, folded carefully. Inside, it read, "I wanted to understand how you stayed kind in a world that rewards performance. I think I'm starting to see. Thank you for your silence." It spoke louder than I expected. K. Keanu sat with the letter for a while. Then he folded it neatly and placed it inside a drawer where he kept only a few things. Old letters from his sister, a photo of his mother, and now this. He didn't need an apology. He never asked for one. But something in the world had shifted because of that night. Not in headlines or ratings, but in the quiet decisions people were starting to make when no one was watching. But the rest of us watched. Kim's message wasn't a PR move. It was a first step. And Keanu, in his usual way, didn't post, didn't reply, didn't announce anything. He simply continued living the way he always had, quietly, with intention, with heart. What began as a setup to humiliate him had become something no one expected. Not a scandal, but a spark. One that had already begun to catch. 3 days after the viral wave seemed to settle, something unexpected began happening. Donations started pouring into a small pediatric fund in Los Angeles. It wasn't attached to any big celebrity name or flashy marketing campaign. The donation page was simple, its mission quietly stated in plain language: to ease the days of children who don't have many left. At first, people thought it was a fan response to Keanu Reeves' speech, but then a few investigative journalists dug deeper and discovered something that had never been made public. Years before the fundraiser incident, Keanu had quietly founded a nonprofit under a nondescript name, the Still Light Foundation. There were no galas, no sponsorships, no press releases. Just handwritten letters from terminally ill children, nurses who remembered him bringing meals to night shift workers, and records of payments made for treatments no one could afford. The organization had operated out of a tiny office near Glendale, with a team of just 4 full-time staff members. Most of the work had been done anonymously. No one even knew who the founder was, until now. Once the truth surfaced, word spread like wildfire. News outlets rushed to confirm it, and the official documents spoke for themselves. Keanu had never taken a dime in salary, never listed himself as a board member. Everything he gave quietly. The contrast between the viral stunt and this revelation was almost poetic. While some celebrities were trending for what they wore or who they dated, Keanu was now trending for what he never advertised: his heart. Within a week, the foundation received over 12,000 new donations from people across the globe. Some sent in a single dollar, others thousands. More moving than the amounts were the messages. A teenager from Ohio wrote, "I'm donating in honor of my brother, who died last year. I wish someone like you had been there for him." A nurse from Portland said, "I saw your story and it reminded me why I entered healthcare. Thank you for helping when no one was watching." But what really caught Keanu's attention was the surge of messages from young people, Gen Z and millennials, who said the story changed their view on kindness. "It's not about being seen anymore," one comment read. "It's about what you do when no one's watching." That line stuck with Keanu. He wrote it down on a scrap of paper and pinned it to the inside wall of the foundation office. For him, it became a new kind of mission statement. Still Light wasn't just a name anymore. It was a movement. With the unexpected spotlight on the foundation, Keanu knew it was time to act. Not for publicity, but to ensure the wave of goodwill didn't fade like a passing trend. He quietly called together the original 4 members of the foundation team, all of whom had worked with him for years. Rosa, the operations manager, had tears in her eyes when she walked into the room and saw him already working at the donation counter, personally handwriting thank you cards. "This is bigger than us now," Keanu said gently, placing another envelope in the outgoing bin. "We need to build something that lasts." He proposed a rebrand, not a commercial overhaul, but a renewal of the foundation's spirit. They would call it Still Light, inspired by the simple idea that kindness doesn't always need to be loud to be powerful. The new mission would be to amplify invisible acts of healing across the country, not just treating sick children, but also comforting families, helping overworked nurses, and reaching those who felt unseen. But instead of hiring marketing firms or celebrity endorsements, Keanu wanted the message to spread person to person, word of mouth, action by action, volunteer by volunteer. He recorded a single short video, just 90 seconds long. In it, he sat beside a hospital bed, holding the hand of a small boy named Luca, whose leukemia had returned. Keanu didn't say much, just a few heartfelt words about listening, about being present, about how sometimes just showing up could change a life. There were no edits, no background music, just stillness and light. The video went viral within hours. Thousands began applying to volunteer. Medical students offered their free time. Musicians reached out, hoping to play for children in wards. Teachers, veterans, even former critics of Keanu sent in letters asking how they could help. The simplicity of the message struck a nerve in a world oversaturated with noise. It wasn't about virtue signaling. It was about service. One of the first to act was Sasha, the influencer who had publicly apologized after the fundraiser incident. She asked if she could organize a local chapter in her city, not for cameras or likes, but because she meant it. Keanu agreed, but only after she promised there'd be no social media tags or promotional content tied to it. No hashtags, he smiled, just heart. Still light chapters began forming in unexpected places. Small towns in Iowa, schools in the Bronx, even a clinic in rural Montana. What united them wasn't religion or politics, but one shared belief that people deserve to be seen, especially in their darkest moments. One high school teacher from Oregon printed out Keanu's quote, "What if we started trying to see?" and placed it above every classroom door in her school. It became a quiet pledge among students. Acts of kindness spiked. A student-led fundraiser sent enough funds to cover 10 pediatric chemo kits. The ripple had started. As the months passed, the momentum didn't slow. It deepened. One morning, Rosa stepped into the still light office and found Keanu alone, sorting through envelopes filled with handwritten letters. Some were from families expressing thanks for support they'd never expected. Others came from children, scribbled in colorful markers, filled with hearts and stars. One small note read, "Dear Still Light, thank you for making my mom smile again." Keanu paused at that one. He folded it carefully and placed it in a box marked, "Why We Do This." Despite the global scale the movement was beginning to take, Keanu never gave interviews, never sought praise. He declined invitations to accept awards or speak at conferences. When asked by a journalist why he stayed quiet, he simply said, "The work speaks louder." Eventually, people stopped trying to make it about him. They began making it about each other. Hospitals reported spikes in anonymous donations. One ICU nurse shared how, during a shift change, she found a hot meal left for her, with a note that read, "You are light." A group of teens started an initiative to write weekly letters to terminally ill children they'd never met. No return address, just love. In a world that often forgets how to pause, the Still Light Project reminded people what it meant to care without needing recognition. And somewhere out of view, Keanu Reeves kept showing up. Quietly, constantly, faithfully. The letter arrived on a gray Thursday morning. Keanu had just returned from a meeting with a group of volunteers helping expand the Still Light outreach into schools. His days had become quietly full. Emails from pediatric centers, phone calls from social workers, late-night sessions writing personal notes to children going through unthinkable pain. But this letter stood out. Not because it came in a fancy envelope or carried a return address. It didn't. It was folded into a plain white envelope, sealed unevenly, and addressed only to Keanu Reeves, Still Light. He opened it carefully, expecting another thank you or donation inquiry. Instead, the first line hit him like a quiet storm. "I was planning to end my life the night I saw your speech." He sat down without realizing it, the letter trembling slightly in his hands. The handwriting was neat, but some of the ink looked smudged, as if it had been written through tears. The girl's name was Mariah, 16 years old. She didn't say where she lived. She didn't list any diagnoses or life history, but the story she told was unmistakably real. She described how she had been drowning in silence for months, how every time she spoke, she felt invisible, unheard, alone. That night, she wrote, she had been scrolling on her phone while crying under her blanket, just trying to distract herself from what she had already planned. She was watching video after video, numb and ready to go through with it, until one clip stopped her. It was the moment from the fundraiser, when Keanu had stood silently at the mic, before saying in a low and steady voice, "Silence isn't weakness. Sometimes it's how we heal." Mariah said she had never seen someone so calm while being mocked. never seen someone so gentle in a room full of noise. And for some reason she couldn't explain, that image pierced the fog in her mind. "You reminded me I didn't need to be loud to matter," she wrote. Keanu read the sentence again and again. Then he cried. He sat with the letter in his lap for a long time. The room around him was silent except for the soft ticking of the old wall clock, one of the few things he'd kept from his childhood apartment. Keanu wasn't the kind of man who cried easily, but this wasn't a tear born of sadness. It was something deeper, a recognition that all the pain he'd once carried, all the losses, all the quiet years, had somehow made space for this moment. He folded the letter and held it to his chest. Then he got up, walked to his small desk, and pulled out a pen and a sheet of thick paper. He began his reply slowly, carefully choosing each word. He didn't know where to send it yet, but he wrote it anyway, a letter meant only for her. "Dear Mariah," he began, "you may not realize this, but your words saved something in me too. Sometimes we go years thinking the silence we carried doesn't matter. But your courage, your choice to stay, mattered more than I can say." He didn't lecture her. He didn't offer empty affirmations. Instead, he told her a quiet story about a time when he, too, had considered walking away from the world. After losing his daughter, then his partner. How he didn't know how to be in a world that kept asking him to move on. But one day, someone left him a note. Just a stranger, a kind fan. And that one note reminded him there was still good left in the world, that even in grief, there was light. "I guess your letter's that for me now," he wrote. He ended the message with one simple line. "You don't have to shout to be strong. Just stay. That's enough." He signed it not with a printed signature, but in his own small looping script, "With all the quiet strength I have left, Keanu." The next day, his team helped track down the girl through social media. It didn't take long. Mariah had used a private handle to share a brief video, tearful but steady, thanking the actor who reminded her to breathe. Keanu didn't share it. He didn't need to. But he did ask his team to arrange something quietly. A scholarship, a mental health counselor near her town, and a personalized invitation to join Still Light's new youth advisory panel. If she ever wanted to. She did. Mariah joined the Still Light youth panel just 2 months later. She didn't arrive with a camera crew or social media fanfare. Just a notebook, a quiet voice, and a fire inside her that hadn't burned in years. At her first meeting, she listened more than she spoke, but when she finally shared her story, the room fell silent. Not because of sadness, but because of the unmistakable strength in her vulnerability. She didn't dramatize it. She simply said, "I thought I didn't matter. Then someone I never met showed me that kindness could echo louder than cruelty." From that moment, she became more than a survivor. She became a symbol. Schools started inviting her to speak, not as a viral moment, but as a steady voice for young people who didn't feel seen. She began each talk the same way, by reading part of Keanu's letter aloud. She never said his name. That was the agreement. But everyone knew. Keanu watched from a distance. He never sought to appear in her spotlight, only to protect it. When a journalist once asked him about the mysterious girl speaking to teens across the country, he just smiled and said, "Sometimes the quietest people make the loudest impact." Mariah's life didn't magically become perfect. She had setbacks, days where the sadness crept back in. But now, she had tools, community, and more than anything, she had purpose, a reason to keep going, and to help others do the same. By the end of the year, she helped co-author a mental health curriculum now used in over 300 high schools. She titled it, "The Power of Stillness." In the final pages, she included a message, just one sentence. "To the man who taught me that silence isn't weakness, it's strength. Thank you. She never signed her full name. Blur. Just Mariah, still here. Keanu kept her letter in a locked drawer beside his bed, where he kept the few things that truly mattered. And every now and then, when the noise of the world grew too loud, he'd pull it out, reread it, and remember why grace, even in the face of humiliation, was always the right choice. Because sometimes, even the cruelest setups can become lifelines. And sometimes, a whisper in the dark can save a life. In the weeks that followed Mariah's rise and the quiet expansion of the Still Light Foundation, the spotlight on Keanu didn't fade. If anything, it grew more intense. News segments rehashed old interviews. Magazines suddenly devoted cover stories to the quiet revolution of Keanu Reeves. But not all of it was celebratory. Some media outlets, desperate for traction, began digging into his past, not to honor his resilience, but to poke at the wounds that hadn't fully healed. One article, titled "Tragedy Chases Kindness," plastered old photos of Keanu with his late partner Jennifer and their stillborn daughter. Another showed grainy images of him walking alone on a city bench years ago, branding it proof of loneliness behind the myth. For a man who had never used his private pain for public attention, it felt intrusive. Yet Keanu never responded. No tweet, no press statement, no angry rebuttal. Instead, he was seen that same week at a small children's hospice center in Northern California. He brought books, puzzles, and quietly sat on the floor, playing with a boy named Jordan who had terminal leukemia. The nurses said he arrived unannounced, stayed for hours, and left without even a photo. One nurse, moved to tears, later shared, "He didn't just visit, he listened." That same day, a journalist cornered him at a parking lot outside a grocery store, shoving a mic in his face. "Do you think people use your kindness to ignore the darker parts of your story?" the reporter asked. Keanu paused. The question wasn't cruel, it was honest. After a moment, he looked up and said, "We all carry shadows, but I don't think kindness is about pretending they're not there. It's about choosing what you offer others, even when you're hurting." The clip aired that night, but it was a later interview that really captured the world. During a brief appearance on a late-night program, the host, known for his edgy tone, joked, "You don't seem to fight back much when people misrepresent you. Ever think about defending yourself?" Keanu sat still for a second, then, with a quiet smile, said, "Kindness doesn't need armor." The audience went silent. That quote spread like wildfire. It appeared in memes, was painted on school walls, even etched into a mural outside a counseling center for teens. It was printed on bracelets, pinned to jackets, whispered in classrooms. Because it wasn't just a line, it was a decision. The quote, "Kindness doesn't need armor," spread across the internet like wildfire. It wasn't just admired, it challenged people. In a world where controversy trended faster than compassion, Keanu's calm answer felt like a quiet revolution. But not everyone welcomed it. Some tabloids doubled down. One labeled him Hollywood's saddest star, dredging up past interviews and tragedies, questioning whether his silence masked something broken. Another article twisted his story into one of loneliness and avoidance, implying that his kindness was a coping mechanism rather than a strength. Friends grew concerned. His team offered to push back. Keanu gently declined. He said, "I'd rather spend energy helping someone than explaining myself to people who don't want to understand." And he meant it. That same week, Keanu visited a public high school in the Bronx. No press, no entourage. He sat with teens in a small counseling group, listening to stories of grief, anxiety, and broken homes. One student, Devon, asked, "Why don't you defend yourself?" Keanu looked at him for a moment, then said, "Because sometimes the best defense is to keep building something good." That moment stayed with Devon. He wrote about it in his college essay, titled, "The Day Kindness Sat Across from Me." It earned him a full scholarship. As the days passed, the public grew more curious, almost hungry, for the truth behind Keanu's calm. But he gave them nothing dramatic, No emotional interviews, no fiery tweets. Just his continued presence in places that rarely made the headlines. A special needs school in Oregon, a grief counseling center in New Jersey, a shelter for abused women in Albuquerque. Quiet visits, no press, just human connection. But that wasn't enough for the louder corners of the media. Tabloids began dredging up his past. They published timelines of the tragedies he'd endured. The stillborn daughter, the car crash that took his partner, the childhood abandonment. Each headline was framed like a question. Is this why Keanu Reeves is so silent? On a morning show, a host read aloud a comment from a viewer that asked, why doesn't he just speak up and defend himself? Keanu's response was calm but firm. He said, "You don't need to build walls if you're not throwing stones. I'm not here to win arguments. I'm here to show up where people are hurting." The host sat still for a second longer than usual. That moment of quiet said more than words. Later that week, a teacher from Cincinnati posted a story about a letter she received 5 years earlier. It was from Keanu, thanking her for her work with autistic children. No fanfare, just gratitude. She had framed it and kept it on her desk. She shared a photo of the letter. The ink was fading, but the impact hadn't. In Los Angeles, a street artist painted a mural of Keanu with the words, "Kindness doesn't need armor." The image spread like wildfire. It wasn't just a meme, it was a message, a philosophy, a quiet rebellion against cruelty disguised as entertainment. That had all been pre-taped, but Esclay's eyes looked. Influencers who once mocked him began posting long reflections about humility. One podcaster admitted, "He didn't clap back. He didn't cancel anyone. He just reminded us how powerful it is to stand in dignity when the world tries to tear you down." And still, Keanu said little. He showed up at a small library in Detroit, donating new books and sitting quietly in the back of a children's reading hour. He paid for a new dialysis machine for a rural clinic in Mississippi. He responded to mockery with mercy, to intrusion with grace. For every cruel headline, there were 5 acts of anonymous kindness. For every laugh at his expense, there was a child being helped because of him. He didn't answer his critics. He made them irrelevant. In a world obsessed with being loud, Keanu Reeves showed what it meant to live gently, to let truth speak for itself, to stand still and still be seen. And in doing so, he reminded millions, you don't need to fight to be powerful. Sometimes, you just need to care. 3 months had passed since the Beverly Hills fundraiser that had become the spark for a nationwide movement of compassion. The noise around the event had faded. The hashtags had slowed. But something quieter had begun to stir beneath the surface. It started with a whisper, an unconfirmed sighting in Fresno, California. No red carpet, no designer gown, no film crew. Just a woman in oversized sunglasses walking through the back entrance of a children's recovery center. She carried a canvas tote filled with books and craft supplies. A nurse greeted her like she was just another volunteer. It wasn't until the woman sat cross-legged on the floor of the pediatric unit, reading to 3 kids with IVs attached to their arms, that a volunteer finally recognized her. It was Kim Kardashian, but she didn't come to be recognized. There were no selfie stations, no publicist in the wings. She didn't hand out branded gift bags or launch a campaign. She just stayed there for 3 hours, reading, laughing gently, and helping kids glue feathers onto paper wings. She wore no makeup, just a hoodie and jeans. One little girl with a bald head from chemo leaned into her lap like it was the most natural thing in the world. That night, a volunteer posted a single blurry photo on a community Facebook page. The caption was simple. He didn't say much, just showed up and helped, left through the back without a word. The post didn't go viral immediately, but people started noticing, not because of what Kim said, but because of what she didn't say. There were no tweets, no Instagram posts, no statements to the press. Just quiet, consistent visits to places most people didn't even know she was going. 2 weeks later, she returned to the same center, this time with 3 large boxes of sensory therapy toys she had purchased herself. The staff said nothing to the press. They had been asked not to. Still, word began to spread. A pediatric nurse in Fresno mentioned her name in a Reddit thread about celebrities who surprised you by being real. A comment under it read, "She's different lately. Feels like someone told her to look with her heart, not her followers." Keanu never publicly acknowledged it, and Kim never reached out again after their quiet cafe conversation. But it was clear something had changed. Her presence in these spaces wasn't dramatic. It wasn't even particularly organized. But it was genuine. Her phone stayed in her pocket. Her voice softened. She started listening more than she spoke. And those who once doubted her intentions began to question their own assumptions. In Los Angeles, the director of a pediatric cancer center received an unusual message. Kim Kardashian's team had called, not with a PR pitch or camera crew request, but with a quiet question. Would it be possible for Kim to visit a few of the children? No press, no social media, no red carpet presence. Just Kim. The staff was skeptical at first. These types of requests often came with strings attached, but the tone this time felt different. They said yes. 2 days later, Kim arrived in a plain black hoodie and jeans, hair pulled back, sunglasses tucked away. She was unrecognizable compared to the polished image on television and Instagram. In her hands, a tray of slightly messy cupcakes, baked with her own children, she explained softly to the receptionist. She spent hours inside, far longer than anyone expected. She read stories aloud to a group of kids with leukemia. She helped a young girl named Lila braid the hair on her synthetic wig and painted fingernails with glittery polish she had brought. She sat on the floor playing cards with a boy named Marcus who was recovering from surgery. She laughed gently, but didn't dominate the conversation. She didn't post a single photo. She didn't take out her phone once. One of the teenage volunteers, Ezra, later posted a blurry photo of the moment online, not for attention, but because it moved him. The caption read, "She didn't act like a celebrity, she acted like someone who needed to be there. That made all the difference." He didn't tag her. He didn't need to. The internet figured it out within hours. But what stunned everyone wasn't the identity of the woman in the photo. It was her stillness, her presence. It didn't match anything people expected. Within days, other quiet visits began surfacing. A middle school teacher in Compton posted about a mysterious donor who covered a student's funeral expenses. A single mother in San Bernardino received groceries for 2 months and a signed card that simply read, "Your story matters." Each time, speculation followed. But no confirmations ever came. Kim didn't speak publicly. She didn't try to change the narrative. She just changed her actions. Meanwhile, talk shows and gossip blogs that once mocked her tone-deaf marketing began changing their tune. Commentators on podcasts and YouTube shows, many of them the same influencers who'd laughed that night at Keanu's expense, began admitting they may have missed the bigger picture, that people could grow, that sometimes the quietest shifts meant the most. And while Keanu Reeves was never named, never credited, and never asked to be, those who were paying attention knew exactly where this ripple had begun. Weeks after the blurry photo from Fresno went viral, it quietly made its way to Keanu's desk. A staff member at Still Light printed it and left it on a stack of mail in his office, unsure if he'd want to see it. Keanu paused when he reached it. He studied it carefully. The soft lighting, Kim sitting cross-legged on the floor, her attention fully on a bald little boy holding up a drawing. There were no filters, no production, just presence. He didn't say anything. He didn't need to. Later that evening, he made a call to the same children's center Kim had visited. Not to discuss her visit, but to arrange something else. Books, art kits, and adaptive technology for children too sick to attend regular school. When the center director thanked him for responding to Kim's visit, Keanu simply said, "No, I'm responding to the children." He never mentioned her name again. But something had shifted in both of them. Not through confrontation, not through viral outrage, but through quiet witness. Months later, a well-known magazine published a piece titled "The Soft Revolution." It featured a long-form essay about how kindness, dignity, and grace, not clickbait, were becoming the new aspiration for a generation exhausted by performance. The article didn't name Keanu or Kim directly, but the opening line echoed something Keanu had said at the fundraiser. What if we stopped trying to be seen and started trying to see? By the time the piece reached the mainstream, both Keanu and Kim had already moved on, but the culture hadn't. In schools, in families, in community groups, people were referencing that one strange fundraiser where everything seemed to go wrong, until someone chose to meet it with compassion. It was never about the roast. It wasn't even about the apology. It was about what came after. And the world, for once, chose to follow the silence, not the spectacle. It started subtly. A red carpet premiere for a major blockbuster was scheduled to take over Hollywood Boulevard, but the star of the film, a well-known action hero, chose to skip the press altogether. Instead, he posted a simple photo on his social media. He was at a local library reading to a group of foster kids. No stylist, no tuxedo, no hashtags, just a caption that read, "This felt more important today." People noticed. The media scrambled to understand it. Was this a new trend? A publicity stunt? But it wasn't just one actor. Within weeks, more began doing the same. A rising actress canceled her luxury brand campaign to partner with an organization that helped young mothers get back on their feet. A comedy duo turned down a late-night talk show appearance to visit a shelter for LGBTQ+ youth. When reporters asked why, their answer was brief. "We saw what Keanu did." There were no declarations, no big statements, just decisions. In production rooms, studio executives began to review projects differently. A proposed series based on celebrity gossip was shelved, while a heartfelt screenplay about community healing suddenly got greenlit. A director known for edgy satire pitched a docuseries on kindness around the world, citing Keanu Reeves as the inspiration. It wasn't a revolution, but it was a rebalancing. The industry, so long shaped by spectacle and scandal, was starting to bend towards something softer, something more grounded. People were tired of noise. They wanted depth. And Keanu, without trying, had shown them what that could look like. At first, the headlines tried to spin it. Hollywood goes quiet. Is it the Keanu effect? From paparazzi to pediatric wards, celebs follow Reeves's footsteps. But soon, even the headlines faded. Because the stories weren't meant to be flashy. They weren't designed for clicks. They were simply happening. A former teen idol, once known for his tabloid breakdowns, started showing up regularly at a mental health hotline in Los Angeles. No announcement, no live stream. He just answered phones. When asked why, he shrugged and said, "Keanu told a story once about listening being the kindest thing you can do." An award-winning director donated his entire year's salary to build music rooms in underfunded public schools. He requested no plaque, no building named after him. A producer who made millions on a show centered around celebrity scandals quietly stepped away and began mentoring screenwriters whose work focused on stories of resilience. A quiet movement was building. It didn't have a hashtag, it wasn't branded, but it was real. And then came the documentary. Titled Stillness, it was unlike anything the entertainment world had seen in years. It featured no flashy editing, no dramatic music, just simple conversations. People from all walks of life. Makeup artists, sound techs, first-time filmmakers, a janitor at a soundstage shared how one moment with Keanu changed their path. They talked about unexpected acts of kindness, a listening ear, a shared sandwich on a long shoot, a moment of eye contact that made them feel human. Keanu declined to be interviewed, but his absence was the point. When Stillness premiered at a modest film festival in Oregon, there were no paparazzi, no step-and-repeat banners, and no major studio executives. Just folding chairs, paper programs, and a room full of people who had either been moved by Keanu's story or were quietly seeking something gentler in a world that shouted too much. The documentary didn't begin with dramatic music or flashy cuts. It opened with a black screen and one line in white text. Kindness doesn't need armor. Then came the stories, one after another. A camera assistant who once thought her job was meaningless until Keanu made her feel seen. A grieving mother who received a handwritten note from Keanu after the loss of her son. A janitor at a studio lot who remembered Keanu sitting with him during his lunch break, talking about life, not fame. Word spread fast, but not through headlines. Schools began requesting the documentary for media literacy programs. Community centers held weekend screenings where teenagers sat in silence, reflecting. Even therapists began recommending it to patients overwhelmed by digital noise and pressure to perform. Hollywood didn't flip overnight, but a new kind of energy crept in through the cracks. Screenwriters stopped writing characters who only screamed to be heard and started exploring arcs of vulnerability and grace. A few producers greenlit films that didn't end with explosions, but with reconciliation. More actors used their platforms not to advertise, but to advocate. A-list celebrities who once only attended the Met Gala now made time to volunteer at children's reading programs. At the next Golden Globes, a young actor stood on stage with trembling hands. She held up her trophy and thanked Keanu Reeves. Not for a role, not for a contact, but for teaching her, in her words, how to stop acting when it matters most. There was no laughter, just stillness, then applause. The ripple touched unlikely corners. A podcast formerly focused on celebrity gossip shifted into spotlighting everyday heroes. A fashion brand launched a campaign highlighting caregivers and teachers instead of influencers. Even one tabloid issued a public apology for how they'd covered Keanu's past, publishing a heartfelt editorial titled, "The Man We Never Really Saw." Through it all, Keanu never commented. He never responded to the praise. He just kept doing what he always did. Showing up, listening, helping without fanfare. He didn't shift the industry by force or campaign. He shifted it by remaining unchanged in a world obsessed with reinvention. Not a revolution, a recalibration. One man, choosing grace over grandeur, had reminded an entire industry, and perhaps a generation, that influence isn't measured in volume. It's measured in the lives touched quietly, without need for credit. And somehow, those echoes were still spreading. It started with an email. A respected entertainment producer, someone who had spent decades crafting award show moments and celebrity tributes, reached out to Keanu's team. The upcoming Global Humanitarian Media Awards wanted to recognize Keanu Reeves with a Lifetime Impact Award, not just for his film legacy, but for what had become known informally across the industry as the Keanu effect. Keanu's team responded with gratitude but made it clear he would not be attending. No red carpet, no stage, no acceptance speech. Instead, Keanu sent a handwritten letter, delivered in a plain white envelope. It read, "If you must tell my story, tell the parts that never made the screen. Not the applause, but the moments no one clapped for. Not the headlines, but the hospital rooms. If you want to honor me, honor the ones no one sees. That's where I'd like to be remembered." The producer sat with the letter in silence. Then, rather than cancel the tribute, she changed the show. At the end of the televised ceremony, the lights dimmed. The audience, expecting a sizzle reel of Keanu's most iconic film roles, waited in silence. But instead of action scenes or interviews, the screen lit up with a simple message. This is not about Keanu Reeves. This is about what he inspired. Then came a montage. A retired nurse in Kansas who started a local grief group for widowed mothers. A young man in Detroit who paid off the school lunch debt for his entire district. A bus driver in Phoenix who pulled over to comfort a crying teen. A barista in New Hampshire who handed a free drink to a stranger with the words, "You're not alone," written on the cup. Each clip was submitted anonymously in response to an online campaign that had gone viral the month prior, in honor of Keanu. People across the country had been invited to share acts of kindness they'd done, not for attention, but because they were inspired by how Keanu handled cruelty with compassion, mockery with mercy. There were no names, no applause cues, no celebrity cameos, just everyday people doing what they could to make someone else's life a little easier, a little brighter. The audience, filled with some of the most recognizable faces in film, fashion, and media, sat still. Then, one by one, they began to cry. Not because it was sad, because it was real. And for the first time in the show's history, the closing credits rolled not over a pop song or sponsor message, but over the sound of handwritten letters being read aloud by children. Words of hope, words of healing, words of grace. In the days following the broadcast, the response was overwhelming. News outlets that usually rush to report scandals found themselves covering kindness. Morning shows played clips of the closing montage over soft piano music. The phrase, "the Keanu effect," appeared in op-eds and editorials not as a marketing term, but as a cultural shift. Even late-night hosts, known for their sarcasm, spoke with rare sincerity about what they'd seen. But Keanu, he said nothing. He didn't release a statement. He didn't respond to press requests. He was spotted days later at a community garden project in Oregon, wearing gloves, helping a group of high schoolers plant fruit trees for a food bank. A young volunteer who recognized him asked, "Why didn't you show up to accept the award?" Keanu looked up, dirt on his hands, and simply said, "I already have what I came for." The moment was captured in a grainy photo by one of the students and uploaded without fanfare. The caption just said, "This is the award." The photo spread like wildfire, not because of the image quality, but because of the quiet truth it captured. In an age of curated lives and digital noise, here was a man who lived by a different rhythm. A rhythm that didn't crave visibility. A rhythm that measured success not by fame, but by impact. Soon, schools began incorporating the Keanu effect into leadership curriculums. A high school in Vermont created a program called Quietest, encouraging students to practice weekly acts of kindness without seeking credit. A university in Ohio launched a media literacy course that asked, what if influence wasn't about being loud? The ripple reached even further. A corporate conference in Chicago swapped its usual keynote speaker with a former foster child who had once been helped by a stranger, and only years later discovered that stranger had been Keanu, donating anonymously to cover her tuition. People began reflecting differently. Awards started to feel a little less shiny. Spotlights a little less important. And it wasn't because Keanu told anyone what to do. It was because he reminded people who they were at their best. By staying silent, he'd created a new kind of fame, one that didn't rise and fall with trends, one that couldn't be taken away with one bad headline, one that didn't need a publicist to survive. And yet, it was the kind of fame that lived on in the choices of others, in the moments no one would ever record. Months after the broadcast, the award show's producers received thousands of letters, not about celebrities, but about everyday people who had been moved to do something kind. A man in Idaho shared how he'd paid off a stranger's grocery bill after remembering Keanu's story. A teenage girl in Alabama described how she forgave a friend who had bullied her. A mother in New Jersey told how her son, once obsessed with online fame, had deleted all his social media accounts and joined a local volunteer group. These stories didn't go viral. Most of them weren't even shared online. But they were real, and they were enough. 1 year later, the same award show producers wanted to honor the movement again. This time, instead of trophies, they mailed handwritten thank you notes to every nominee. No live broadcast, no applause, just letters signed by children from hospitals, schools, and shelters, the ones who had truly been touched by what all of this stood for. Keanu, when asked if he'd seen the new tribute, just nodded. Then, once again, he changed the subject. He had other things to do. That day, he quietly visited a hospice center in New Mexico. No announcement, no interviews, just a quiet afternoon playing guitar for a room of patients who didn't know they were in the presence of a man who had accidentally started a movement. A nurse later wrote on her private blog, "He didn't talk about himself. He just listened. I think he saved someone's spirit that day." The movement continued, not as a trend, but as a culture. A quiet culture, one where dignity mattered more than applause, one where being seen wasn't the goal, but seeing others was. And though Keanu would never step on stage to accept a Lifetime Achievement Award, the world had already given him one. It was etched, not in gold, but in the way people now paused before posting, or chose to act when no one was watching. A new kind of fame had been born, and it didn't need lights to shine. The Still Light Foundation had started as a whisper quiet acts of compassion from Keanu, offered in private, with no need for credit. But years later, what began in silence had become something bigger than anyone could have predicted. It wasn't just a foundation anymore. It had become a living thread, woven into the lives of those it touched. Former teens, once lost in despair, were now returning to help others. Some became mental health counselors. Others became artists, using their pain to shape healing spaces for others. A few became teachers, working in underserved communities and bringing with them a quiet message of hope that didn't come from slogans but from lived experience. One of them, a young woman named Sasha, had once made headlines for her tearful apology video after mocking Keanu during the viral event years ago. She had since earned her degree in psychology, opened a trauma recovery center in Portland, and named it The Quiet Room. When asked by a journalist why she chose that name, she said, "Because kindness doesn't shout, and healing starts where noise ends." The Quiet Room wasn't flashy. There were no neon signs, just a modest brick building with sunlight in every window, soft couches in every hallway, and shelves filled with letters of gratitude. Sasha never marketed it. But word spread among those who truly needed it. One of the counselors who joined Sasha's center had been a young boy during his battle with leukemia. Back then, he had received a handwritten note from Keanu. It was just a simple message. "You matter more than you know. Keep going." That boy, now a grown man, kept the note in his pocket during every chemo session. The paper had worn thin, creased from worry and hope, but it never left his side. Now, he worked with children facing the same fear he once lived through. When asked why he chose this path, he simply said, "Because someone once reminded me that I mattered when I felt invisible. I want to pass that forward." This ripple wasn't orchestrated. Keanu never sat down to design a strategy. He didn't build a brand, he just kept showing up, one person at a time. And those people, now grown, weren't just surviving. They were building, they were leading, they were healing, and they all carried a quiet light that had once been lit by a man who never wanted credit, only connection. In a small town in Ohio, a former recipient of the foundation's early outreach opened a weekend arts program for children dealing with grief. He had lost his mother in a car accident when he was 12. That same year, a care package arrived anonymously. Inside was a set of paints, a journal, and a message typed in simple font. Art is how some hearts breathe. Don't hold your breath. Years later, he discovered it had come from the Still Light Foundation. Now his classroom was filled every Saturday with kids from all walks of life, some silent, some angry, some terrified to speak. But by the end of each session, color filled the walls. He didn't hang up grades or awards, he hung up stories. And at the bottom of every piece of artwork, each child was asked to write one sentence that mattered to them. No names, just one line of truth. The most recent edition read, "I drew my dad because I miss him every day, and nobody at school lets me say that." That's what Still Light had become. A quiet force that made space for people to feel what the world often told them to hide. In Los Angeles, another story was unfolding. A girl who once sat next to Keanu during one of his unannounced hospital visits had grown up to become a pediatric nurse. Her name was Selena. She remembered the day clearly. She was 13 on her 5th round of chemo and felt like giving up. Then a man with gentle eyes and worn-out boots walked in. No cameras, no entourage, just a board game under one arm and a sack of snacks under the other. He didn't ask her questions. He didn't pretend to understand. He just listened as she talked about how tired she was of everyone trying to be strong around her. He nodded once, placed a small flashlight on the nightstand and whispered, "Keep a little light by your bed for when the world goes dark." That flashlight stayed with her. It sat on every nightstand through years of treatment. Today, it sits in her nurse's locker. And now, she's the one walking into dim rooms, the one who doesn't try to fix pain, but sits beside it. The one who doesn't offer answers, but presence. And the patients? Young, scared, unsure. They don't know her story, but they feel something different. A stillness, a comfort, a sense that they matter, even when they can't speak. Stories like Selena's quietly echoed across the country. None of them made headlines. They lived in the silent spaces where real change takes root. Classrooms, shelters, hospital waiting rooms. In Seattle, a boy who grew up homeless remembered receiving a single note while staying at a shelter supported by Still Light. It read, "You are not invisible." He kept that slip of paper tucked inside his school binder for years. Today, he works as a social worker, and for every child who walks into his office, he hands them a card. Inside, it always ends the same way. You are not invisible. He never met Keanu Reeves, but somehow, he said, he felt like Keanu saw him anyway. In Colorado, a trauma counselor who once survived her own suicide attempt now runs a center for at-risk teens. She named it the Quiet Room. There are no slogans, no neon lights, just a single phrase on the wall: stillness is not weakness. She'd heard Keanu say it in that now famous speech. It stuck with her. In the moment when she needed something to believe in, those words kept her grounded. The foundation didn't grow by noise, it grew by grace. One person, one quiet choice at a time. The studio was quiet when Keanu Reeves walked in. No red carpet, no audience, just a softly lit room, 2 chairs, and a single camera. Across from him sat a respected journalist known for asking difficult questions. But today, even she seemed different. Gentler, more aware of the weight this moment carried. Keanu settled into the chair with a calm presence that needed no announcement. His hair had grown a little longer, streaks of gray now visible. He looked older, but somehow more peaceful. The interviewer greeted him, and they shared a moment of eye contact that said more than words could. She began, not with a scandal, not with fame, but with sincerity. "Keanu," she said, "it's been nearly 5 years since that night, when everything shifted, when you were set up, when the world saw something different in you. May I ask, how do you look back on it now?" He smiled, not the media training smile, but a genuine one, the kind that makes people lean in. "Best night of my life," he said. She blinked. "Really?" Keanu nodded. It didn't feel like it at the time. It felt strange, uncomfortable. But that night didn't expose me. It revealed something bigger. It showed me how strong kindness really is. He looked down briefly, as if remembering the exact moment. The awkward joke, the crowd's laughter, the silence that followed his calm response. Then his eyes returned to hers. "It was never about defending myself," he said. "It was about holding space for something else. Grace, restraint. We live in a world where everyone's trying to be clever, loud, viral, but sometimes stillness is more powerful." The interviewer nodded slowly. "And you didn't respond for days? No statement, no tweet, just silence." He chuckled softly. "Silence speaks when you trust it." She leaned forward. "You've had a life marked by loss, heartbreak, pain. You've also had extraordinary success. Which part do you think shaped you more?" Keanu paused, not to craft an answer, but to genuinely reflect. "The pain gave me depth," he said quietly. "But the love I found in unexpected places, that's what saved me. Whether it was a nurse smiling through her shift or a child handing me a drawing, those little things, they taught me how to stay soft in a hard world." The interviewer sat still, not rushing to the next question, letting the silence breathe. In that moment, even the crew seemed to hold their breath. The interviewer took a moment before continuing, her voice softer now. "Keanu, you've become a symbol of something different in this industry. Not rebellion, not spectacle, but quiet strength. Did you ever imagine that being kind would be the thing that made the most noise?" Keanu gave a light shrug. "No, I thought it would be the thing no one heard." He smiled faintly, as if amused by life's irony. "But kindness, it's not always silent. It echoes. Just not in the way we expect. Not in headlines, but in the way people treat each other after they walk away." She nodded. "So many people were impacted by that one moment, by the way you didn't react the way others expected you to. You turned a setup into something meaningful. Why do you think that resonated so deeply?" Keanu leaned back, his hands resting on his knees. "Because people are tired. Tired of pretending. Tired of shouting just to be heard. Deep down, we all want permission to be real again. That moment gave people permission." He paused again, his gaze wandering toward the corner of the room where a small vase of fresh daisies sat. "I didn't do anything heroic. I just didn't fight ugliness with more ugliness. I let it pass through me." The interviewer reached for a paper on her lap. "We've received over 2,000 letters for you since this episode was announced. Most of them thank you for what they call reminding us of dignity." One in particular stood out. She handed him a small envelope, already opened. Inside was a child's crayon drawing and a short note. Keanu opened it slowly. The picture showed two stick figures, one labeled me, the other labeled you, both standing under a big yellow sun. The note read, "You make me want to be good." Keanu stared at it, not saying anything. "That was from a 7-year-old in Nebraska," she said gently. "His mother says he saw your hospital visits on YouTube and started holding the door open for people." Keanu's throat moved, but he didn't speak. Instead, he folded the drawing carefully and tucked it into his coat pocket. "I think that's the award," he said finally. "That's everything." The interviewer smiled. "You've never accepted a major industry award. Never even attended when honored. Why?" Keanu looked thoughtful. "Because the real wins never happen in front of cameras. They happen when nobody's watching. When you show up for someone who can't give you anything back." He reached beside him and pulled out another letter. It was still sealed. "This one came yesterday," he said, holding it up. "I haven't read it yet, but I already know it matters." And as he held that envelope in his hands, the studio fell completely still. The silence that followed wasn't awkward. It was reverent. as if everyone in the studio understood they were witnessing something rare. A man who had nothing to prove, yet everything to give. Keanu placed the sealed letter gently beside him and looked up at the interviewer one last time. "You once said that grief carves a deeper place for love," she said softly. "Do you think that's what this has all been about? Filling that space?" Keanu nodded. "Grief is a great teacher. It stripped away everything that didn't matter. What was left was this quiet urge to keep others from feeling forgotten. Maybe that's the only legacy I want." He glanced at the cameras, then back at her. "We all want to be remembered, but I've found something better than being remembered. It's helping someone else feel seen while they're still here." The camera began its slow zoom out. Keanu didn't shift or posture. He simply sat, hands folded, shoulders relaxed, his gaze still thoughtful. Across the world, the broadcast reached millions. It was unlike any interview people had seen. There were no bold headlines, no viral sound bites, just a sense of peace that settled over those watching. On social media, the moment began to ripple. People shared the clip not with hashtags, but with stories. Stories of moments when they chose kindness over sarcasm. Stories of late-night texts they sent to check in on friends. Stories of silent hugs that mattered more than speeches. The letter he held in that final image became a symbol, a metaphor. Viewers began calling it the letter of hope. Though no one knew what it said, it became the emblem of something more powerful than fame. The belief that even the smallest gestures could change the world. Later that month, a teacher in Vermont started a classroom project inspired by the interview. She asked her students to write letters, not to celebrities, but to people in their lives who had shown quiet kindness. By the end of the week, every student had written one. Some gave them to janitors, some to lunch ladies, some to classmates they never spoke to before. That teacher mailed one of those letters to Keanu. He never spoke publicly about receiving it. But months later, a child at a hospital fundraiser spotted a folded piece of paper tucked in the inside pocket of his coat. The edges were worn, the handwriting childlike. It simply said, "Thank you for reminding me that the quiet ones still matter." The final interview had no standing ovation, no dramatic exit. Just one man holding an unread letter, smiling with the weight of 1,000 lives touched. And in that stillness, the world seemed to exhale, not because it was entertained, but because, for once, it had been moved. The sun was low in the sky when Mariah stepped onto the small stage at the community center. A simple wooden podium stood before her, and in her hand was a single sheet of paper. The crowd wasn't large. Mostly volunteers, patients, and a few families from the children's hospital. Keanu sat quietly in the back row, wearing a hoodie and jeans, almost unnoticed. But Mariah noticed. She always did. She looked down at her page and took a slow breath. Then, with a steady voice, she began to read the poem she had written. "You didn't shout. You didn't fight. Included, you just stood." And somehow, the world listened. The room fell silent, the kind of silence that didn't ask for more, a silence that settled in the heart. She continued, "You weren't trying to win. You weren't trying to prove. You just loved. And we moved." Each line hung in the air like soft lanterns drifting through a quiet sky. Some in the room wept. Others closed their eyes. Keanu remained still, his expression unreadable, but his hand clenched the edge of his chair just slightly. Mariah finished her poem and stepped back. There was no applause, only stillness. And then a single clap from an elderly woman in the front row. Slowly, others followed. But it wasn't the kind of applause meant for a performance. It was the kind meant for someone who had survived. Afterward, the lights dimmed, and a short video montage began. There were no celebrities, no flashing lights, just clips from the past year. A teenager helping an elderly man across the street, a girl handing her lunch to someone at school, a boy pushing his brother's wheelchair through the park. Each one a moment of kindness, each one quiet, each one real. Then came a frame, a stack of letters, some handwritten in shaky cursive, others typed and printed on school paper. Letters to Keanu, the title read. Then clips of children drawing. One sketch showed Keanu holding hands with a child under a starry sky. Another simply read, "Thank you for showing me how to be soft and strong." The camera lingered on one drawing. It showed a candle with a soft glow, and below it, a single phrase, "Still light." That phrase had become more than just a name. It had become a way of being. As the video faded, one final scene played. Keanu walking through a hospital hallway, unnoticed. He stops at a room, peeks in, then enters. The door closes quietly behind him. No words, no music, just the image of a man choosing presence over performance again and again. And then came the voiceover prompt, warm and reflective. Have you ever been misunderstood, only to turn it into something beautiful? The screen lingered in silence for a moment longer after the question faded. Then came images. Simple, powerful snapshots of the ripple effect Keanu had never asked for, but had quietly created. A middle school gym in Detroit filled with volunteers, repainting its worn walls. A community center in New Mexico, handing out handmade blankets stitched by teenage girls who once called themselves invisible. A librarian in Tulsa, reading to kids while holding a copy of Mariah's poem printed on a bookmark. In each frame, there was no fanfare, just warmth, just people choosing to care without needing to be seen. Then, a new clip rolled. A small group of high school students stood outside a hospital in Oregon, holding a sign that read, "Still Light Club. We show up quietly." One of them, a boy with shaggy hair and paint on his jeans, looked into the camera and said, "We saw the video last year. We stopped trying to go viral and started trying to go local." They didn't explain further. They didn't need to. Next, a letter was displayed on screen. The handwriting was uneven, probably from a child just learning to write. It read, "Dear Mr. Reeves, my mommy says you help people without asking for anything. I want to be like that. I gave my toy to the sad boy in class. He smiled. Thank you." Keanu had never posted about what happened that night with Kim. He never commented publicly on the speech that had gone viral. And still, here it was. A movement without a face. A cause without a campaign. The montage slowed and one final clip emerged. It was a zoomed-out shot of Keanu sitting on a bench beneath a tree. It wasn't recent. It looked like it had been captured years before, perhaps by a fan or a quiet observer. He sat there holding a cup of coffee, legs crossed, watching a flock of birds scatter across a city park. He wasn't talking, he wasn't performing, just breathing, just being. A line appeared on screen. The world doesn't need louder voices, it needs truer ones. Then came the final prompt. What story should we tell next about Keanu Reeves? The screen faded to black, but the feeling didn't fade. Not for those who had watched, not for those who had wept quietly in their living rooms or pulled over in their cars just to sit with what they felt. Because this wasn't just a story about a setup that became a stand. It was a reminder that grace, when met with cruelty, does not lose. It multiplies, and that perhaps the most powerful moments of our lives are the ones no one claps for. In the quiet of the closing scene, Mariah's voice returned. Soft, steady, and unmistakably real. You didn't shout. You didn't fight. You just stood. And somehow, the world listened. Her poem wasn't long, but it didn't need to be. The weight of her words didn't come from complexity. They came from truth. From the kind of truth that didn't need explanation, just presence. As her voice faded, images of her standing on a small stage at a community center came into view. She held the microphone nervously, but her eyes were bright. Behind her, on the wall, someone had painted the words, "Be the quiet that echoes." And then, in one final surprise, the video lingered on a table. On it sat a stack of letters. Real letters, handwritten by viewers around the world. Some addressed to Keanu, some to Mariah, some to no one in particular. They said things like, "You made me believe in people again. I haven't spoken to my dad in 10 years. I'm calling him now. I watched for entertainment. I stayed for hope." And then came the last voice. It wasn't Keanu. It wasn't a celebrity. It was a young boy's recording, crackling softly with homemade sincerity. "I saw your kindness. Now I'm trying it too. It's hard, but it feels good." That was it. No credits, no theme music, just a fade to black. And one final line on screen. "Have you ever been misunderstood, only to turn it into something beautiful?" Underneath it, the final call to action stood gently. Tell us below, and tell us, what story should we share next about Keanu Reeves? This wasn't just the end of a video. It was the beginning of something else. Not a trend, not a movement, but maybe a return to stillness, to decency, to the kind of fame that leaves no fingerprints, only light. Still light. The screen faded completely now, but the silence it left behind didn't feel empty. It felt full, like a pause after something sacred, like a quiet that might just echo.